shortly.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much indeed for joining this weekly Greater Manchester briefing on COVID-19. Joined today by the Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverly Hughes, and I'll bring Bev in a moment to update you on policing matters. Also joined today by Councillor Elise Wilson, leader of Stockport Borough Council, and we'll bring in Elise later to talk about the position in Stockport. But if I may start by presenting the overview of cases in Greater Manchester, as we always do, and hopefully a slide will appear before you. And what this shows is, I think it's fair to say, an improved picture in Greater Manchester from last week to this, with the headline rate in terms of number of cases per 100,000 being down fairly significantly from 36.3 to 28.9. Underneath that, you can see that the majority of our boroughs are also now recording falls, some small, but some significant. Most notably, I'm pleased to say, Oldham. Would just want to pay tribute to the leader of Oldham Council, Councillor Sean Fielding, and his team, everyone who's been working so hard in Oldham to bring the numbers back down. I think really encouraging progress has been made there. Overall, 8 of our 10 boroughs are recording an increase. As I say, some small, so Manchester would be an example of that, where cases have fallen slightly, but I think the position there you would describe as plateauing, and obviously we will be working hard to bring about a reduction there, working with Manchester City Council. Also, perhaps it's worth pointing out, Bury has slowly increased over the last few weeks. So again, working with our colleagues there. So certainly places to keep an eye on. But overall, the picture is an encouraging one. And I would say what this shows is, if you look at the figures that we had for the start of the period, the week ending the 1st of August, that's of course when the restrictions came in to the picture now. Of course, you know, the restrictions didn't take immediate effect. They were trying to stem the increase that we saw in those 2 following weeks, in the 8th and the 15th, and we did see an increase in most of our boroughs. What this week's figures show, I think, is that the restrictions have worked. They have kind of taken a position where we had increases in 9 of our 10 boroughs to one where now we've got decreases in 8 out of the 10. So I think we could say with some confidence that the restrictions have worked. It was right to support the government when they came to us asking to introduce these restrictions, and we believe that combined with the efforts on the ground have given us an improved position that we look at today. But there's no complacency. We would accept that the numbers remain high, including in Oldham, Manchester and elsewhere, and we'll be working with colleagues there to continue the improvement that we've been seeing. So that's it from me. Perhaps just to mention, if I may, just the positivity rate, which Sir Richard Lees normally mentions, which is the percentage of tests that record a positive diagnosis. We can say this week that in all 10 boroughs we are in the green zone, if you like, that the positivity rate is below the threshold. So that too is an encouraging sign. So I'll leave it there for now. I'll come back in a moment, but I'll hand over now to the Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverly Hughes. Bev.
You're muted, I think.
Bev, I think you may be muted. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realise that. I'll start again. The picture in terms of policing, Andy, thank you, is one of, even by its own standards, exceptional demand at the moment. And there are 3 main factors behind that. Firstly is the general rise back to more normal levels of crime, and particularly serious crime. You'll recall that incidents of crime across the board decreased by about 25 to 30% during the main period of the restrictions. Those figures are now up to business as usual, and incidents of very serious crime taking place as we've had before. So some serious assaults, murders, rapes and so on, which the police are attending to. Secondly, I wanted to mention the factor in relation to police calls for assistance from people with mental health problems. This is always a significant part of the caseload that the police work with, in terms of people calling for assistance from 999 and the 101 line. Those calls are up by 42% at the moment compared to figures in February, and on average almost 60 officers a day are dealing with people who are calling the police because of mental health problems, and that is double what we would normally expect. Nearly 90% of those calls come through the 999 line, and that is up from 11,999 calls a week to about 15,000 calls a week, as I say, many of them with a mental health issue. There are three main reasons in terms of this increase. It's very often a problem of not taking medication, but in this particular circumstance, in this COVID time, bereavement is a significant factor behind many of these calls, and also people feeling that they haven't got the support that they actually need during this period. So we've set in place fortnightly gold meetings, that is a multi-agency strategy meeting to try and meet this demand more effectively, and crisis line, 24/7 crisis line, and joint work between the local authorities, the mental health services and the police to try and respond better to people in these circumstances. And then the third factor, of course, is the work the police are doing to try and help us all to comply with the restrictions in relation to COVID. It's an extremely busy time in relation to that activity, at the weekend particularly, but not only at the weekend. And just to give you some indication of last weekend, there were nearly 600 incidents reported to the police with a COVID-19 element. Nearly 400 of those were house parties or indoor gatherings that involved a significant number of fixed penalty notices being issued, and in one instance a closure order on that house. I might say I think it's very difficult for the police at the moment in terms of trying to strike the right balance. They don't want to move to enforcement straight away. They try and encourage people and explain and avoid enforcement measures if possible. But in some instances, that's not possible. And we've seen also assaults on police officers during this time. It's a significant cost as well for the police. Last weekend, we had mutual aid provided by 4 other police forces. And that will happen again this weekend. We've got 100 extra officers coming in from other adjacent police forces, and of course there's a financial cost to that because we have to pay for those additional officers. So, you know, we really want to say to people again as we come into this bank holiday weekend, please don't have large gatherings in your gardens, in your houses. Please comply with the restrictions as they exist at the moment and help us to keep people safe. In addition to the calls to house parties and gatherings, of course, the police and local authority partners are also visiting licensed premises and businesses, 400 of those visits over last weekend. Happy to say that most of those were complying, and that was a big improvement on the situation a few weeks ago. So I think that's generally the picture. We are obviously prepared as we go into a bank holiday weekend. to continue that level of operation, both in relation to the social gatherings and also in relation to businesses and licensed premises, retail sector, and so on. And as I say, there's extra deployment of officers from elsewhere to support the operations that GMP, along with our local authority partners and enforcement officers, will be mounting this weekend. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed, Bev. So just to take you through what was discussed at the Greater Manchester COVID Emergency Committee, which met earlier today. We're in a position now, following the statement by the government last week, that we're being asked to send in on a weekly basis the views of leaders, myself and other agencies on a weekly basis with regard to the restrictions. And of course, this is the day that Wigan is released from the Greater Manchester restrictions. So as we said last week, we've been continuing to take a close look at the situation in other boroughs, and we promise to update you. But just first, if I may, to take you through the points where leaders agreed, and that will be in our letter going to the Secretary of State. The first is around the delay in the opening of casinos, bowling alleys, beauty parlours that had been in place in Greater Manchester when the rest of the country was allowed to open those places. We agreed to delay, but we now need to reiterate a call I made last week, which we believe needs to be answered by the government. There is no case anymore to delay the opening of those establishments. Last week we said we wanted to see it in 9 of our 10 boroughs. We would now say in Oldham as well, all 10, because the evidence that we have suggests that the vast majority of transmission is within the home, hence the restrictions that we've had over the last month, but not in those places, and that they don't pose a risk. So what we will be saying to the government today is we don't see any case now for the continuation of that prohibition on the opening of those establishments, and we'd ask for that to be agreed as part of this week's review. The second point of agreement amongst leaders this morning was in expressing a concern around what the government said last week around considering the restrictions on a ward-by-ward basis and potentially allowing a mixed position within boroughs. I wouldn't say this was a unanimous position, but it was certainly the overwhelming consensus of our meeting this morning that that is not a road that we should go down. It's a recipe for utter confusion, division and chaos. And we're saying to the government that we do not want to work in that way. To play in the concerns of members of parliament, obviously they are valid and need to be heard, but you cannot say that views from one community alone can dictate what happens for the whole of a borough. So we are saying very clearly back to the government today that it's the council leaders and their teams themselves that need to be in the driving seat when it comes to decisions about the lifting of restrictions, and people do not want to see a division within particular boroughs, and we'll be expressing that back to the Secretary of State today. Sadly, I think what we begin to see is some people playing politics at a local level with these issues. The view of the leaders was that is entirely the wrong way to go. We will continue to be evidence-based in the way that we approach this, and we will take the responsible course as we've done all along, and that is to work through districts and Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and we'll continue to relay that back to the government. The third area where there is strong agreement was around test and trace needing to dramatically improve in Greater Manchester if we are to be in a position of strength going into the autumn and the winter, with all of the challenges that the return of schools will bring. At the moment, it's not performing well enough. The figure that around half of people testing positive, or sorry, I should say half of the contacts of people testing positive are being successfully contacted by the national system is nowhere near where it needs to be. The call today from us to the government, and will be in our letter, is for much greater local control over the test and trace system, and particularly for the government to honour the promise it made around reallocation of resources from the national system to local level. We haven't seen that yet in any meaningful way, and we need to see it, because it's clear to us, the evidence is that local contact tracing efforts are much more successful than the national system, and we need to see this rebalancing of NHS test and trace with a switch of resources from national to local, and that needs to happen quickly with much greater local control, as well as we've said before, financial support for people to self-isolate. We believe the reason why there is a significant burden of disease in many of our boroughs is because of the number of people who will find it very difficult to agree to a request from NHS Test and Trace because of the nature of their employment. And this issue isn't going away. The government hasn't corrected it, and it must correct it. Otherwise, it's leaving some of our less affluent communities, not just in Greater Manchester, but across the country, in a very exposed position going into the more challenging months of the year. And that simply isn't right or acceptable to us. So we need financial support for people to self-isolate. And if I could turn finally to the question of the status of the Greater Manchester restrictions. As you saw on the figures as they stand, while there is progress, in many of our boroughs there are still high numbers of cases, and of course we do now have to think about the imminent return of schools and planning safely for that. So the position of the leaders was to maintain the restrictions, or to ask the government to maintain the restrictions for 7 of the 9 boroughs currently covered by those restrictions at present, and that will be part of our letter to the government today, with a review in 2 weeks' time. We don't think it's helpful constantly to be reviewing it every week. There needs to be a degree of stability, particularly taking us through the reopening of schools. But as you saw in the table, there is a very much changed position in Bolton and Stockport, and consistent with what we said last week, where Wigan had a very different position. We're obviously following that approach this week, and had heard from the leader of Bolton, you'll shortly hear from the leader of Stockport Council, in reporting to us that there is a political consensus within those boroughs now to ask the government to remove the restriction on social gatherings in the home introduced at the back end of July, and that will be what is said in the letter that goes to the Secretary of State later today. So with that, I will hand over to the leader of Stockport Metropolitan Borough Council, Councillor Elise Wilson. Elise.
Thank you, Andy. So yeah, today I am in consultation with our local MPs advocating on behalf of Stockport that the government eases restrictions that have been placed on Stockport over the last few weeks. Now this is based on our infection data, which is showing a continued downward trend, and that's across all our areas, and it is the current case. So this is based on where we are right now. We can see that downward trend. We know that that's across the borough, that we've seen that overall, and it is where the position as we stand today. And those levels that we've got at the moment are within the government's acceptable levels, within their green areas, and it's on that basis that I think it's time now for the government to ease those restrictions. I would think that it's really important to say that the reason we're in this position, the reason that the data is showing that decline, is because of the hard work of the residents of Stockport, and it's them that have followed the measures, and it's them that have made it so that that downward trend going forward. I think it's important to mention that going forward, we may see fluctuations again in the data and in infection rates. I think it's important to recognise that the schools are going back, but I'm confident that we have an outbreak management plan that's robust and that will be able to address those issues as they come forward. But it's all still dependent on the people of Stockport continuing to follow public health advice, continuing to wash their hands, maintaining the social distancing, and really looking after each other and continuing to take care of each other, so that together we can all get through this and keep those infection rates down, and really able to get on with our lives going forward. So I'm hopeful that the government will listen to this ask and announce soon the restrictions for Stockport. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise. Thanks very much, Elise. And just to echo what you just said, I think the picture across Greater Manchester is improving because of the fantastic public of Greater Manchester, who the vast majority of whom have followed what we've asked them to do. And obviously, in the end, that is why the picture is improving. I do have to support the efforts of our public health teams at local level, our councils, and that has all helped. But largely, it's because the public are working with us, and we're really grateful to them. But again, to echo what Elise just said, it will only stay in an improved position if we carry on following the advice, even though we're asking the government to consider lifting the restrictions in a further 2 of our boroughs. We would say to people living in those boroughs, in many ways, carry on, if you like, giving plenty of heed to the advice about social gatherings in the home, because it's only by being careful about the way we interact that we're going to kind of maintain the position that we've got. So minimise those gatherings in the home. Obviously, we want no gatherings in the home in the boroughs that are maintaining the restrictions, as the Deputy Mayor said. Maintain the social distancing, face coverings at all times on public transport, in supermarkets, and we want more support from the supermarkets in enforcing that. This is the way we will get through this, and this is the way we will live with COVID until a vaccine and an effective treatment is found. So just very much wanted to endorse what Elise has said. With that, I'll hand over to Jimmy, who I think is going to take us through the questions today. Jimmy.
Thank you, Andy. So the first one is for you, Andy, and it is at 2:13, and it's from Kim Pilling at the Press Association. Kim asks, question for the Mayor. Broadly speaking, can you give us a flavour of the recommendations on restrictions from GM local leaders, councillors, MPs that the government has requested for its review this week, i.e. the lifting or keeping of restrictions? And secondly, have you any comments on the new process itself?
Thanks, Kim. So the GM approach, let me just be really clear about this. It's follow the evidence and not the politics. As I said in my opening remarks, I have a concern that the kind of way this new approach has been constructed allows people to play politics, but that is entirely the wrong thing to do in a pandemic, in my view. We haven't done it, we won't do it. We will follow the evidence, and obviously the evidence points to the change that we've been able to ask to be made in Stockport and Bolton, and we'll continue to work in that way. And we'll do the same for the remaining 7 boroughs that still have restrictions. And what I would say about the process is that you cannot have a situation where a very parochial view is being taken of this, where people are just looking at their own patch as a member of Parliament and not giving wider consideration to the bigger picture. Now, our leaders are in a position to give consideration of the bigger picture, and so are we at the Greater Manchester level, and we believe that is the right way to handle this. So by all means, we will take and we will continue to take on board the views of our MPs, but we also need to stop a situation where some people are seeking to politicise these decisions. They are difficult decisions. We're trying to act at all times in the best interests of our residents. We don't want restrictions for a minute longer than they're needed, and hence the decisions we've made now about Wigan, Stockport and Bolton. but where they are in place, it's for good reason, and that is to protect the health of our residents. And we will carry on working in that way. And we have concerns that the process that has been set up is undermining that approach. And that is of concern to us, given that we've worked with the government on this and supported them and actually brought about a change in Greater Manchester. It was the right thing to do. It remains the right thing to do, to carry on working in this way. And we hope the government will accept our recommendations to them today and not come up with a different set of recommendations, because this is very much the consensus that we've reached, and we hope the government will respect it.
Thank you, Andy. So 2 questions for you now from first Stephen Kingston at the Salford Star at 2:28 and Aaron Benson from Roche Valley Radio at 2:26, and they're similar questions. So Stephen asks, you're asking people in Salford to keep to these restrictions for another 2 weeks. What would be your message to them, particularly those with restriction fatigue, given that Bolton is on a border with the city? And Aaron asks, one region that's continually seen a rise in cases is Bury. Have you personally spoken to Bury Council about these figures, and can you put your finger on why we have seen a steady rise?
Well, thank you to you both. Both very fair questions. Firstly, to deal with the Stockport, the Salford situation, it is tough. I mean, I'm the first to recognise that. It is hard to ask people to have to make changes to the way they would want to be living their life. Now, we've said all along, though, people call it lockdown. It isn't lockdown. The measures that are in place are a restriction on social gatherings in the home. Now, we do need to keep that in proportion. Of course, we wouldn't ordinarily want there to be any such restriction, but given the number of cases in Salford that we saw on the slide, it's still at the high end of where we would want to be. That's my message to people. You know, that level of virus circulating in communities poses a risk, and therefore we need to manage that and protect people. And that's the message. You know, this is about, as I've always said, it's about your health, your son and daughter's health, your mum and dad's health, your grandparents' health. It's about everyone's health. And you know, until we are, all of us, happy that the level of risk has been successfully reduced, we are going to say to people we think it's right to maintain these restrictions, as difficult as that is. But conversely, you know, where we see the change in a particular borough, as we've seen in Bolton, you know, then not maintaining those restrictions longer than they're needed, because that also wouldn't be right, and it would further create that problem with fatigue that you mentioned. So we're trying our best to find a way through this. We know there'll be no perfect way through it, but we hope people will see the path that we're following and will come with us. On your question, Aaron, of course I've spoken personally to the leader of Bury Council. He addressed our meeting today and expressed the concern that there was not a single problem within the borough, that it was obviously an issue in different parts of Bury. So he was clear that the restrictions were needed in Bury for now, given the rise that they've seen. As ever, it's not possible to put your finger on one thing, but of course the issue with social gatherings amongst young people is an issue within the borough, as it is elsewhere, and we would reiterate the message that these restrictions apply equally to people of all ages, and that also includes young people. And we would ask young people to think particularly of the older members within their families before attending any social gatherings.
Thank you, Andy. So these are questions for Bev, and Andy, you may want to come in off the back of them. They're about policing and enforcement. One, Bev, is from Steve Robson at the Manchester Evening News at 2:30. An estimated 170,000 people came to Manchester for Pride Festival over the bank holiday in 2019. There are reports of many people planning to travel here, despite it being postponed this year. How will police approach any large gatherings in the streets in the city centre? A connected question, Bev, is from Dominic Hughes, 2:13. What measures are in place to deter any plans for raves or illegal gatherings this bank holiday weekend? And how will they be dealt with if they do go ahead? And Andy, the connected question off the back of that is from Eloise Linford at Hits Radio. What would your message, Andy, be for those thinking of heading out en masse this weekend to celebrate Pride? And again, she asks what measures will be in place to stop gatherings.
Thank you very much, Jimmy, and thank you, Stephen and others for those questions. Obviously, this is something that the police are aware of. Working with our local authority partners, they'll apply the same approach. The operation that's been going ahead over the last few weekends in relation to illegal raves and large gatherings will be implemented. That's an approach that depends initially on getting good intelligence, and we will depend on the public and others to provide information as to what may be being planned. If there are large gatherings, say in relation to Pride, then the police will do as they have been doing. They will try and encourage and explain and encourage people to disperse and only use enforcement as a last resort. But if there are very large gatherings, the police will seek, to help people to comply with the current restrictions, because they're there for a purpose, as Andy's saying, and it's about stopping the spread of the infection. In relation specifically to Pride, the Manchester Pride Group have put on an alternative festival. It's 3 days of live events that you can receive via stream in your living room. Live in your living room is the headline, and we'd really encourage people to take part in Pride, which is an important event for Manchester, and I know for other people beyond Manchester. But there is a way to participate in that safely this year, and I'd encourage people to support Manchester Pride in that way by going to the online festival over these 3 days. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you, Bev. And Andy, if you wanted to address the question from Hits Radio, which is your message for those thinking of heading out en masse this weekend to celebrate Pride.
Well, certainly understand the frustration that everyone feels that Pride can't take place as it would normally do. It's every year, it's just an incredible weekend in the city, a celebration of our commitment to equality, and frustrating that it can't happen in that way this week. But I would absolutely endorse what the Deputy Mayor has just said. There is an online celebration this year, working with our friends at United We Stream, who are really pulling out the stops to make it an amazing event. That's the way to celebrate Pride this year. Pride is about respecting each other, isn't it? It's about looking out for each other, and it wouldn't. I think it would undermine the usual message of Pride if we were to see gatherings and large numbers of people travelling to the city. That's not what the organisers want. Obviously, they want, like we do, to see Pride back in the streets of our city, and hopefully that will take place next year. But very much would say that the message is, the online event is there to allow people to be together, to celebrate together, but obviously not to congregate in the city. So that is a message that we're all putting out, and we'll all be supporting the online event in our own way, and would encourage everyone to do that.
Thank you, Andy. So 2 connected questions from Kit Vickery at the Bolton News at 2:35, and Nigel Barlow at About Manchester also at 2:35. Andy, and then Elise may also wish to come in and comment specifically about Salford, but Nigel asks, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was said that Greater Manchester would work together in unison during this crisis. As of today, depending where you are in Greater Manchester, there are different sets of rules to abide by. Is this practical? After all, you have always said that we live in a homogenous unit with people crossing artificial borders every day. Kit at the Bolton News, Andy, asks, is there a concern about how the easing of restrictions will impact on people who live one borough and work in another? Will people living in Bolton and working in Bury pose more of a risk than those who live and work in Bolton? So perhaps you first, Andy, but then Elise might want to come in to talk specifically about any challenges that Stockport faces.
Okay, Nigel, well, in answer to your question, it remains the case that we want to work together as Greater Manchester, and we've done that all the way through, and we will carry on doing that. But part of the Greater Manchester approach, as I said earlier, is to follow the evidence. And I did say when the GM restrictions first came in that we would continue to look at the position in different boroughs. Of course, there is an interconnected nature in Greater Manchester, but that doesn't mean that we just have a one-size-fits-all blanket approach at all times, it does mean you've got to be pragmatic and sometimes take different positions in different boroughs. So we agreed that with Wigan last week, and now that there is a consensus within Stockport and Bolton about moving in the same direction, of course we support people. The restriction fatigue that our colleague from the Salford Star talked about earlier will only increase if it looks like there's evidence of change in boroughs and we're not doing anything about it. You know, it's not an easy position to be in, if I'm honest with you. There's no ideal solution here. We're trying to work it as best we can. What we do resist is the breaking up of boroughs into a ward by ward approach. We think that is completely unworkable, and we're going to communicate that clearly to the government today. What we're trying to do here is obviously carry people with us, you know, work at a borough level as much as we can, guided by evidence of the picture across Greater Manchester, and that's what we're doing. But where we can obviously ease the restrictions on people, we should, because these are an imposition on people's lives, and we can't really justify keeping them in place longer than is required. So you know, that's the message that we're going back to the government with today. Obviously, it's their decision, not ours, but we are working as best we can to plot a way forward. I don't think it was ever the case that we were having accepted a GM-wide restriction in the first place, which it was right to do. And I think, as I can legitimately say to you today, it has worked, given the figures that we presented to you. I don't think it was ever the case it was going to be a blanket removal. It was always going to be, as I say, a more pragmatic approach. And I think the vast majority of people in Greater Manchester will see what we're doing, and will go with that, and will understand why we did it in the first place and why we're doing it in this way. On the second question from Kit about the easing restrictions and the effect it will have on people who work in one borough and live in another. What I'd say about that, Kit, is obviously these restrictions were never intended to impact on that, in that people were still free to travel to work. The restriction has always been on social gatherings in the home, and I think the issue has been at times the shorthand of local lockdown. This was never a lockdown on a Leicester style in Greater Manchester. It was just a restriction on those gatherings in homes and gardens. So, you know, that's always been the position. And if people kind of travel around but don't then gather in the home, obviously the restrictions won't impact on their life. So, you know, it's obviously a challenging picture right now, but I think people are pretty clear. If you're a resident of a borough that's still under those restrictions, we're asking you, I think with the support of the government, not to have those social gatherings in the home, because that's where we have evidence of the greatest spread. Jimmy, thanks.
And yes, Elise, on Stockport specifically. You're muted at the moment, Elise.
Mute button. Obviously, you know, we are a city region conurbation, and we have, and there is connectivity across boundaries. You know, it'd be wrong for me to say differently. However, what we're trying to do here is move everybody into a more normal living with COVID scenario as quickly as we can. There is, you know, and I've seen that data. We know that the people of Stockport have worked hard to bring that infection rate down, and it is right that therefore that I think that the government should be lifting those restrictions. The way this has always been led by the government, and I think that's worth remembering in terms of the cross-border nature and how people are. Well, I've got real loads of confidence in the people of Stockport and our neighbouring boroughs, because it's only but with them following the rules and being taking care of each other and wearing face masks when they should be wearing them, and maintaining social distancing and doing the hand hygiene, washing your hands, and really sticking to those basic fundamentals that have really helped us, together with limiting the social gatherings in the home. And I think so I have confidence that people are able to take that forward and continue doing that. I think that's what's going to make the difference. We do care. We do all want to see get through this. We do all want to look after each other, and that's not changed at all. So I don't see a massive difficulty there for me going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. Back to you, Andy. 2 questions. The first is from Joshie Herman from the Mill newsletter, and then Louise Martin from BBC News. Josh is at 2:38. He says, now that infection rates are falling in almost all boroughs, can a very draconian restriction on civil liberties, like a ban on home visits, still be supported? Is there concern that you and the council leaders arguing for an extension on the restrictions are in fact out of touch with residents on this point? And then Louise at the BBC News asks, a few weeks ago, Andy, you said that we had August to get test and trace right before children went back to school. Do you think this has been achieved? And if not, what are your concerns with the schools reopening?
Okay, thanks. So Joshie first. I mean, I disagree with you that this is a very draconian restriction on civil liberties. It's a it's a requirement that people don't have social gatherings in the home. Now, I agree it's an imposition, but I wouldn't describe it as very draconian. What I would say to people is that it's needed to protect their health. You know, that's why the leaders continue to support it, particularly as we look to schools returning. You know, we are obviously wanting to ensure that we stop the circulation of this virus in people's communities, and it's about protecting their health. And you know, in anything, health comes first, and that's why the leaders, in my view, are right to call for an extension, because there is still high numbers of positive cases in 7 of our 10 boroughs. We think it would help if the government set out more clearly the thresholds for intervention or for removing restrictions, so it is still unclear as to exactly where these measures are justified. But it is our collective view that we are not yet in the position of saying that we can remove everywhere, because the numbers of positive cases are still too high, and a number of our boroughs are still in the top 10 nationally. So, you know, difficult as it will be, we will put people's health first, and we won't make an apology for doing that. And Louise, on your question, I did say that, you know, I think it's the safe return of kids to school is critically linked to the performance of the test and trace system, and it isn't still where we need it to be. And you know, that is not to say that kids shouldn't return to school. I think we all agree that that is now a priority, because the damage that's being done by not bringing children back to school is significant. However, it is why you've seen an amplification from us today around test and trace and change to test and trace. We need local control of the NHS test and trace system. It isn't working in Greater Manchester. We were promised more resources from the national system. They haven't come through, but that's what we need to see, as well as that financial support for people on low pay to self-isolate. You know, these are the crucial ingredients in an improved system, and that will be a very, very clear message that we send back to the government today. So it's right that schools reopen, but if we don't improve NHS test and trace in a matter of weeks, then we are taking unacceptable levels of risk going into the autumn and into the winter with community health. And this message from Greater Manchester will only get louder till we get the change that we need.
Thank you, Andy. So sticking on the theme of the return of schools, in fact, we have Niall Griffiths from the MEN at 2:45 and Chris Tye from the Financial Times also at 2:45. Niall asks, what are your thoughts, Andy, ahead of the return of pupils to school? The government has announced that only 10 home testing kits will be given per school ahead of reopening. Does this concern you? And Chris Tye asks again for your view on the new rules on school pupils wearing face masks. Presumably, he asks, this will apply throughout much of the Greater Manchester area, given the current restrictions.
Thanks both. Jimmy, I don't know if you can still hear me. My connection seems to be deteriorating? Is it
We
still
can
okay?
we can still hear and see you, yes.
Good. Okay. So, Niall, firstly on your question, there's certainly a concern about home availability of home testing kits, not just in schools, actually. The directors of public health have raised the concern about the supply of kits to councils. They're not coming through in the numbers needed, and that is also true of schools. It does concern me. It's an issue that requires urgent attention from the government, and is one of those ways in which we can improve the NHS test and trace system if we have more of those kits in the hands of councils and of course schools as well. So that is an issue that is coming through loud and clear. It's nowhere near the number that's needed that's been given to our councils, and we need a lot more. And our lead Director of Public Health made that case today. Secondly, Chris, on your question, I'm not sure I think we've got to this position in a good way, but I think the government is probably right to say that we need to see wearing of face masks in corridors, in schools, in the areas where there are local restrictions, including Greater Manchester. So my view is that this is the right position. If the government agree with what we're saying today, it will apply in 7 of our boroughs. I think beyond that, it should be up to the head teacher to decide. But my own personal view would be, I would err on the side of encouraging students to wear them rather than not, given the challenges that we're going to have living with this virus into the autumn and winter.
Thank you, Andy. Staying on the subject of schools, but actually this is one initially for Elise, which is from Josh Halliday at The Guardian. Josh asks Elise, if Bolton and Stockport are removed from the restrictions, this could mean it would be mandatory for the thousands of secondary school pupils there to wear face masks at the start of the week when schools reopen, but not at the end of the week if restrictions are lifted. Are you happy with the guidance supplied by government on face masks following its latest U-turn last night? I suppose we could then ask Andy if you're happy on the guidance supplied by government on face coverings. And then a question to Bev in the first instance from Eloise at Hits Radio on schools. Bev, will you, by you I suppose, GMP, be punishing parents who don't feel safe sending their children back? But Elise first.
Yeah, thank you. I guess it depends on when the government, if the government decides to lift the restrictions for Stockport, firstly, because it's not our decision. We're sat here today, or I'm sat here today saying I'd like them to do that, but that's for them to decide. They would then need to agree that that's the case, and then they would set the date as to when that would happen. So I think between now and then, there's a few hurdles to go through before we can say that that is the case. I think it seems logical that what the government are proposing at the in the new guidance, that it is at the discretion of the schools. They know their children, they know the pupils, the staff, their communities best, and they can best place to make that decision. I think in Stockport, as a council, we would be working really hard to support all of our schools, maintained or not, in making the right decision for them. I'd say if there are an increased infection rate for some areas, then it also seems logical that there's maybe a different set of rules or something for them on using face masks in schools, because they're in a different situation. But I think that's how I see it at the minute. I think there's still some way to go before we can say this is the date that this is going to happen. So we'll wait and see what happens with that.
Thanks, Eloise, for this question. I think I can safely tell you that a GMP, certainly the police won't be enforcing school attendance in any circumstances in which parents don't feel safe sending their children into school and therefore keep their children at home. This is a matter for head teachers. You'll be aware that I think there's quite a lot of discussion in the media about this. I think many head teachers are saying, they want to take a line which involves engaging with parents and trying to encourage parents to send their children into school. But ultimately, if there were to be any need for enforcement in a particular case, in a particular family, that would be something that head teachers would have to decide on. It certainly won't be something the police will be getting involved in.
Thank you, Bevan. Just Andy, on the question from The Guardian, Josh's question about, are you happy with the guidance supplied by government on face masks in schools?
As I said, not happy with the way we got there, Josh, but I think broadly this is the right position. I take your point about schools starting the week with young people wearing them, then not. I think what I was saying though is I think schools need to carry on using their good judgment, and just because restrictions may be lifted in one borough, it doesn't mean that you don't continue to follow the spirit of what they were about. So I would very much support head teachers in following what they think is right to preserve a culture, to keep a sense of safety within the school environment, and to build confidence amongst the students. In terms of the timing, it was the view of the leaders that it would be right to bring these, if the government agree, that the same time frame with regard to Wigan. So that was just to give councils time to prepare for the change. So all of this is not perfect. I think nobody would claim that it is. We're trying, as I said before, to find our best way through all of this. All times being followed by the evidence, at all times taking a pragmatic rather than a political approach, and that will remain the Greater Manchester position.
Thank you, Andy. So 2 questions now on office-based working. The first is from Richard Marsden at the Daily Mail at 2:52, and then Nigel Barlow from About Manchester. Richard asks, what is your view, Andy, on whether it's now safe enough for office workers to return to work as children return to school? Many city centre businesses such as shops, cafes, hairdressers, barbers depend heavily on such workers for trade and have voiced concerns about their future if they do not return soon. And then Nigel from About Manchester says that Manchester City Centre is still very quiet during the day, suggesting that many workers have not returned to the office yet. At the start of the pandemic, the mayors of Greater Manchester and Liverpool launched their Build Back Better scheme with a working group set up. When will that group report on its findings, and what hope can the public expect to see?
Well, thank you both. So Richard, on your question first, I don't know whether Elise wants to say something, because obviously Elise leads on the economy and business for Greater Manchester, and this is an issue that we care about a lot. We're conscious that there are businesses in the city centre who need to see the return of people to the office to bring that vibrancy back. And certainly from my point of view, I will be returning to the office at least for part of the week in the next fortnight. And I hope that will send a message out more broadly that this is something that others should consider. Obviously, to answer your question, it can be done safely if obviously people wear face coverings on the commute, if they observe social distancing, if the workplace is properly arranged in a way to support all of those things. But it needs test and trace to work. And this is where I come back to my challenge to the government. It isn't working properly in Greater Manchester. So changes are needed. Changes are needed. That is our first line of defence against this virus. And a fully functioning test and trace is intended to support people to return to a degree of normality. That's the whole point. You want that safety net of test and trace to be as tight as it possibly can be, and it isn't at the moment. It isn't working well enough. So there are clear changes that could be made. That switch of resources from national to local, definitely tick. Number 1, get that done. Number 2, get that financial support in place for people on low pay so that they can self-isolate. Because if people can't do that and are staying in work when they're symptomatic or at risk of becoming symptomatic, then everyone is at risk. So these are changes that absolutely need to be made. And the longer we delay these changes, the more will affect that building of business confidence that we need to see. So, to go on to your question, Nigel, we do want to bring people back to the city, as I said, to support the businesses. And you're right, these are still very challenging times for the hospitality sector. We have got a big programme of work underway with our LEP, who are leading on Building Back Better. We are about to publish a 1-year plan for this period of living with COVID that will put into effect a number of the measures to support the Build Back Better drive that we've initiated. But all of this, the building of business confidence, I think, comes from confidence that the virus is being successfully managed. And NHS Test and Trace is not that system yet. It has improved a little in recent weeks, but it's not yet what it needs. And I'll be anywhere about that today. All of our efforts are based upon having that system fully functioning. Elise?
Oh,
it's jumping about. There we go. Always you.
Well, yeah. There's really, Andy said it all. It is really important that we have a really robust, really well-functioning test and trace system in place. And what we know, and we've seen that we've seen it in Stockport, but we've seen it across Greater Manchester, is that local government is really well placed to know its communities and to really get under the skin in the grassroots of things. And so to have local government leading on that, I think, would be a big change and make a big difference to what we're doing. We know the success of local government has made in their element of the test and trace so far, and how it outstrips what the national system's done. So I think I would be completely supportive of Andy on that ask. And again, same with the self-isolating. It's really important that people are able to self-isolate if they test positive, and this is going to be crucial to people being able to go back to work, going out, socialising, and getting back into life and getting back to living a more normal life. And so we must absolutely get these things right. I think what we've seen in local government and across Greater Manchester so far is a real push towards our outbreak management plans and making sure that we can react quickly. In Stockport, we have a robust system in place, so and that's what gives me confidence for Stockport. And I think we see that again replicating across Greater Manchester, so that we can build the confidence that's needed so that people can go back to participating in their lives. But the biggest difference has been people. We have taken this seriously. People of Greater Manchester have taken this seriously. We've been out looking out for each other, doing our bit, and whether that was staying at home and isolating when that was the right thing for us to be doing, whether that's for looking out for each other and getting some shopping for your neighbour down the road, or whether that was volunteering, helping the NHS, whether that was working from home. Lots and lots and lots of us have all been doing that, and I don't see any reason to think that we won't continue to do that if we can build the confidence, and if we can have the right structures in place, and if government will continue to work with us, have those dialogues, have that conversation, and empower us to do what we do so well in local government. I think that's all I'd add to that.
Thank you, Elise. We're into the last few minutes and the last few questions from colleagues. These are two, Andy, on the subject of infection. One's from Joseph Timon at the Manchester Evening News at 2:56, and then another from Joshie Herman from the Mill, also at 2:56. Joseph asks, there have been reports of home testing kits running out in England and Scotland this week, with some people asked to travel long distances to test centres. Has this been an issue in Greater Manchester? Joshie asks, can you release a week-by-week total for the number of tests done in Greater Manchester from week 1 of June to last week, and the positivity rate for each week? Readers are wondering why those numbers have not been routinely released before. Is there a reason why they haven't been?
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. Joseph first. As I said, yes, there is a real issue with supply of home testing kits. It was raised on our meeting this morning by the lead director of public health. So the government does urgently need to address that issue and increase supply. It's insufficient at the moment, and it needs to improve. And that's a position, I think, that's not just a Greater Manchester position. I think it's shared around the country. Joshie, on your question. Yes, I think we could release the total tests done. There's no secrecy. I have put that figure before into the public domain. it's obviously a figure that you need to sort of consider in a wider context, because the basic number of tests done isn't necessarily helpful. Obviously, it's the number of tests per 100,000 population is the right figure, because then that gives you an accurate figure for what should be done in every borough. On the positivity rate, that isn't our data to release, so there is a problem there, because we're not the data controller when it comes to the positivity rate. What I was able to give you today was just that overall picture, which is that we're in the green, if you like, on positivity rates across GM. And that's a kind of good place to end in some ways, because what we have is a position in GM where we're doing far more tests now than we were at the beginning of June, to answer your question, a huge amount more. And that positivity rate is in the green, which I think is encouraging for us from a Greater Manchester point of view. What we can commit to today, what I can commit to, is publishing more routinely the data on testing, the number of tests done per 100,000 population. We'd obviously have to seek agreement from others to publish the positivity rate, but it's something I would, if that can be achieved, would be more than happy to do. I want people to be fully informed about what's going on. I made an argument to the government about release of data to local authorities. I think the more transparency we have about this, as you say, the better people will understand what's going on, and I think the more we'll carry the public with us.
Thank you, Andy. So we're into the final three questions now. The first is for Bev, in fact, and it's from Niall Griffiths at the Manchester Evening News at 3:02. Bev, racial tensions have flared again in the United States following the shooting of another black man by police. Following George Floyd's death, the Combined Authority committed to establishing a race equality panel and a quarterly report on the use of powers by police. What is the latest on both of these? And then, Andy, the final two questions for you. The first is from Hannah Miller at The Guardian at 3:02. You are supporting Crisis's calls today for emergency legislation on homelessness. How urgently is that needed in Greater Manchester? And Aaron Benson from Roch Valley Radio asks, tonight we'll see the first match of Bury AFC in the history of the football club, away at Daisy Hill. Do you have a message to the volunteers at the club who have worked so hard to see the rebirth of Bury come to fruition? But first, Bev, on policing.
Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you, Niall. Yes, we did make those commitments, and I can say that the work is going on to make sure that we meet those commitments in the timescale that we envisaged. So there are plans now in terms of setting up the race equality panel, thinking about and taking advice from people in different communities as to how that is best done. And on the quarterly report, work's been going on over the summer, because what we want to do with that is not just produce the kind of stark statistics, if you like, but try and put as much contextual information around whatever the figures are when we publish it. I think we said that would be sometime in September, and we're on track to do that. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks, Hannah. Yes, strongly supporting the crisis call for emergency legislation, because I think we're about to see the full effects of the economic crisis. We haven't felt it yet. Obviously, been a difficult few months for the economy, but we've not yet seen the human cost of the economic crisis. And I'm afraid to say, I think that is about to come, particularly if the government won't change its position on furlough and extending furlough for sectors that will need ongoing support. If it won't change its position on the ban on eviction. So it was welcome, obviously, that the government's extended the ban until the middle of September, but I'm afraid that is only kicking the can down the road. That doesn't solve what's coming here. We're going to see potentially big rises in homelessness because of the loss of people's jobs, the pressure that people are going to be under. So I think we need to see the government carry on the logic of the everyone in policy. And I would say that does require a change in legislation around that commitment to end no-fault evictions that we've heard from the government before. Well, now is the time to do it. This is the moment definitely to do it. But also on no recourse to public funds. We cannot have a position of saying that we want to end rough sleeping, at the same time that we say that some of the people sleeping rough on our streets can't be given any support from public funds. Those two positions are incompatible. So there are a number of other things that we could say in support of what Crisis is saying, but absolutely, I think this legislation is urgently needed now, as is the continuation of funding for everyone in, because we're going to see real challenges in this winter period. And you know, from a Greater Manchester point of view, we will be continuing to do everything that we can. We have gone into a phase 3 of our bed every night scheme that is funded by us at local level through our own contributions, and we will continue to do that, but we do need the government's support as well. And if we don't, we will see all of the gains that we've made through the Everyone In policy lost over the coming months. In terms of Aaron, your question, I just want to send my very best wishes to everyone involved. It was heartbreaking what happened to Bury FC last year. We did work as hard as we could to try and find a way through for the club. Sadly, that couldn't be achieved. And I just say to everybody involved, you know, we know how precious this club is to you. Certainly from my point of view, working with the leader of Bury Council, we will want to secure the future of Gig Lane as a home for Bury Football Club in whatever form it takes in the future. But you know, I remember very well the first game of FC United at Lee RMI, and I think Bury AFC at Daisy Hill tonight maybe will be a similar occasion, an emotional occasion for everybody involved. But you know, we support what the supporters are doing, and we wish them well. And if I might, Jimmy, just to take this moment just to add something about Wigan Athletic. I think it is frankly disgraceful to hear kind of reports that the club is being broken up, that its assets are just being all sold off. You know, that is not what the administrators should be doing. There is a viable football club here. It matters a lot to the town of Wigan and the people of Wigan. You know, this club must be saved, and we call on the administrators and the Football League to work with the supporters in Wigan to ensure its future as a League One club next year, but still it can be absolutely saved as a League One club. And to hear of the asset stripping that's being suggested is frankly appalling, and it needs to stop, and a future found for Wigan Athletic Football Club. If I can, Jimmy, I'll finish on a more positive note, and it's just to send a message of congratulations to your namesake, the great Jimmy Anderson, on what was just a phenomenal achievement, sporting achievement, 600 wickets. One of the greatest sports men ever to emerge from the northwest of England. You know, this achievement is unparalleled by any fast bowler. Jimmy, we are so proud of you. Well done. This is something that will be in the history books for many years to come. You're one of our own, and one of the very best the world has ever seen. So well done, and something for us all to celebrate in these challenging times. But it couldn't have happened to a nicer bloke. We all salute you, and congratulations. And with that, Jimmy, I think we will call an end to today's press briefing. Thanks very much for joining us, everybody.